Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today we have breaking news as the Russian Federation has officially rejected the non-preconditioned ceasefire that has been proposed by the United States of America in conjunction with a meeting that was made with Ukraine just several days ago. We've already been able to get information from the capital in Moscow that it appears that the Russian Federation will not be looking for any kind of an actual unconditional ceasefire and will be looking for a preconditioned ceasefire, meaning that the United States and the state of Ukraine will have to agree to Russia's terms to even see that a ceasefire begins for peace negotiations to actually commence. We were able to get a load of information just over the past few hours of the developments so far, and we're going to be taking you all through the story and other major news developments through the day in areas such as the People's Republic of China, Syria, and Panama over the course of this news video. But getting on into our breaking news, we were able to hear that inside of Moscow, the Russian Federation was awaiting the U.S.-led delegation, the diplomatic team that was sent by the President of the United States, to discuss the ceasefire arrangement for 30 days with the Russian Federation and whether they would accept or refuse that ceasefire agreement. We do understand that the diplomatic delegation team was led by Witkoff from the United States, and we were also able to see that before he even arrived and the negotiations commenced, we were able to get statements from the chief negotiator of the Russian Federation's delegation, and it appears that they already were going into it with the concept that they were not going to be willing to accept the ceasefire arrangement as it currently exists. The only conditions in which they'll accept a ceasefire is if it was on Russia's terms, meaning that they will have to have pretty much most of the terms that they're looking for in a peace treaty guaranteed to even get into a ceasefire to talk about what a peace treaty would entail. So here are the statements made by the Russian Federation today.
Понимаю, что с нашей стороны это звучит как отказ от этой сделки.
Достигнута договоренность о временном перемирии. Это не что иное, как временная передышка для украинских военных, больше ничего. Вот какие-то такие шаги, которые имитируют мирные действия, мне кажется, они никому не нужны.
Я правильно?
That is the chief negotiator, the Russian representative to the U.S. diplomatic delegation that arrived in Moscow today. And he made it incredibly clear before the U.S. delegation even arrived, just based off of the idea of the ceasefire that came and arrived before the delegation, that they aren't looking to actually end the conflict at all. The chief negotiator is making it incredibly clear that the Russian Federation only views that as stalling and not beneficial to anyone but the Ukrainians, and for the large part, the United States, in their opinion. Once again, taking the entire peace negotiation as an adversarial approach, viewing the United States as an enemy, and any actions at large are not only benefiting Ukraine, but Russia's mortal enemy, the United States of America. We were able to see that the actions of the Russian Federation have already become incredibly clear, even before Putin made an official statement on it today with a press conference with Lukashenko, as we were able to hear in the U.S. Capital of Washington, D.C., that it appears that the President of the United States is beginning to publicly show that he has a great deal of uncertainty that the Russian Federation would ever really follow through with an actual ceasefire, as we were able to hear that according to the Euromaidan press, the President of the United States has warned of devastating financial measures against the Russian Federation if they reject the ceasefire proposal. And according to the President's words, and I quote, "We could do things very bad for Russia, but I don't want to do that because I want to see peace," he stated. This comes as a special envoy arrived in Moscow, led by Witkoff, following Ukraine's acceptance of a U.S. proposed 30-day ceasefire plan. We also were able to hear a little bit afterwards from the Secretary Bessent, U.S. Treasury Secretary, that the President's administration will not hesitate to impose the toughest sanctions against the Russian Federation if necessary to succeed in negotiations on a Ukrainian settlement, making it incredibly clear from all levels involved at this point that it appears that actual faith from the U.S. government, while stated to be quite high, that the Russians want peace prior to this day, the actual confidence that the Russians really do want a peaceful settlement to the conflict at this point is highly uncertain. And it appears that nobody in the U.S. government actually believes that the Russian Federation is going to accept this non-preconditioned ceasefire, pretty much a bilateral, unconditional ceasefire at this point, And the Russian Federation would instead continue to insist on their exact demands being met to even get to peace negotiations. But what is even more insulting than that is that we actually were able to hear that the Russians have laid out a laundry list, an actual grocery list of prerequisites that would be required to begin a ceasefire. Once again, to remind everyone here, just so that way we can speak about this a little bit more clearly and with a little bit more understanding, the United States of America and the President of the United States has approached the peace negotiations with a very aggressive stance towards the state of Ukraine, but it appears that it's soon to be Russia's turn, as we're now seeing that the Russian Federation is most likely going to have a lot of ire directed to it, and we're already seeing that, but we'll get to that here in a moment. But the President's negotiating plan, according to what we're able to see publicly and what we're able to assess here on this channel, is that the President of the United States is attempting to force both sides into a ceasefire, most likely with the hopes that once actual conflict on the ground ends, there really will not be any incentive by either side to begin the war. The war is incredibly expensive and it's incredibly costly in terms of resources and manpower. So as far as the President of the United States may be concerned, just reaching an unconditional ceasefire for both sides that doesn't have to have any preconditioned terms is going to be the best way to iron everything out after a ceasefire has been agreed to. The Russian Federation doesn't view it that way, and once again has viewed it the same way that they have for 3 years. The Russian Federation is not willing to end the war unless if they are able to achieve victory in Ukraine. And they are not willing to try and hash out really most, if not any, terms at all inside of a peace negotiation. If they're going to even get into these supposed peace talks, they largely want to have already won the war before the supposed peace talks even begin, meaning that the peace talks wouldn't even really be a peace talk per se. It would be more so of a formality at that point, because the Russian Federation has laid out things that are incredibly clearly supposed to be laid out or hammered out in peace negotiations in an upcoming peace treaty, but instead the Russians want these things agreed to before they even get to the negotiating table. And here are just some of a few of them, and in a second you'll hear it from Putin himself. But Reuters reports that Russia has presented the United States with its list of demands for a deal to end the ongoing war in Ukraine and reset diplomatic relations with Washington, with officials stating that the list is broad and similar to previous demands made to Ukraine, the U.S., and NATO. The terms are said to include no membership in NATO for Ukraine, an agreement not to deploy foreign troops or a peacekeeping force to Ukraine at all after the war, and international recognition of Russia's claims to Crimea, as well as the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia in southeastern Ukraine. In short, the current Russian front line exists in this area in light red. The dark red is the Russian Federation, and the yellow is the Ukrainian regions. This dotted purple line, or dotted red line, really it's a dotted purple line, it's really hard to see, but beyond that, is a dotted purple line is actually the area of land that the Russian Federation wants to claim. So the Ukrainians, before they even get into a ceasefire negotiation, would have to agree, along with the United States, that they are willing to give up all of this additional land, which is quite a substantive amount, so that way they can even get into peace negotiations, pretty much giving the Russians exactly what they want before they even get to the negotiating table. And then at that point, what reason do they have to actually negotiate? This is a bad faith act by the Russian Federation, full on, like we've seen for 3 years now, and they have actually no aspiration or inclination to make it to a negotiating table and to actually see an end to the war. The chief negotiator of the Russian Federation made it wildly clear that they view this only as a distraction, and the Russian Federation could easily continue to keep the war going for quite some time. Although the reality of the matter is that they probably would only be able to keep the war going at best for another year or a year and a half. But if you do not believe my statements on the matter, I have the statements of Vladimir Putin himself in a press conference today with Lukashenko directly stating that he wants a ceasefire on Russia's terms. In a very colorful way of putting it, he said, I would love a ceasefire, but once again, much like many of Putin's statements, he loves peace, but only if Russia's winning. So here is the statements that Putin made. I'm not going to talk over them. I'm just going to allow y'all to hear the subtitles, well, more so hear Putin speaking and read the subtitles below so that y'all can see exactly in his raw language what he said. So here's the clip.
Но есть нюансы. В чем они заключаются? Первое. Что мы будем делать вот с этим участком в Калинине в Курской области? Если мы прекращаем боевые действия на 30 суток, что это означает? Что все, кто там находится, будут выходить без боя, мы их оттуда должны выпустить после того, как они совершили массу преступлений против мирных граждан. Или украинское руководство даст им команду сложить оружие. Просто сдаться в плен. Как это будет? Это непонятно. А как будут решаться другие вопросы на все линии соприкосновения? А это почти 2000 километров. И там, как вы знаете, российские войска наступают практически на всех участках боевого соприкосновения. И там тоже создаются условия для того, чтобы мы взяли в блокирование целые достаточно крупные подразделения. Значит, эти 30 суток будут как использоваться? Для того, чтобы на Украине продолжилась эта принудительная мобилизация, для того, чтобы туда поставлялось оружие, для того, чтобы мобилизованные вновь подразделения прошли подготовку, или ничего этого не будет делаться, тогда возникает вопрос, а как будут решаться вопросы контроля, верификации? Как мы можем и как нам будет гарантировано, что ничего подобного происходить не будет? Контроль как будет организован?
That is the end of the statement, a brief one for that matter, from the press conference today that was held between Putin and Lukashenko. But it is once again showing us, by all means and measures, that the Russian Federation, and even by Putin's own words and admissions there, is not willing to enter into any kind of a peace negotiation without seeing that the Ukrainian armed forces are practically neutered from the outset, to see that the state of Ukraine is not able to defend its territory, to see that there will be territorial cessations by the Ukrainians to the Russian Federation, or concessions, as it would largely be called, to the Russian Federation. They are looking for an unconditional victory and unconditional terms to be met to even make it into negotiations to see what the end of the war actually would look like. The Russian Federation is also incredibly audacious in these kinds of statements, because Putin in that statement did say that the Russian Federation is making ground on all fronts. That is markedly untrue. This channel follows the news of the war in Ukraine every day for people who may be new to this channel and watching this video for the first time, and we cover everything over every 24-hour cycle, meaning that if the Russian Federation is making ground, we see it. If the Russian Federation is losing ground, we also see that as well. The Russian Federation is actively losing ground at this moment inside of Pokrovsk. As of just this morning, Ukrainian armed forces have declared complete control of the town of Shevchenko, south of Pokrovsk. This is a major advance because, once again, we have been able to see the Ukrainian armed forces have continued to take a larger amount of settlements around the southern area of Pokrovsk, including Lysivka, Shevchenko, Kotline, Udachne, and we've also been able to see of advances further south off of this map near to the area of what would be Saratov, and it appears that the Ukrainian armed forces within the Pokrovsk direction, which is the largest ongoing battle inside of Ukraine currently, are actually winning the conflict, and they are not losing, as the Russians claim. Not only that, the state of Ukraine over the past week has been able to liberate the large majority of Toretsk, and has pushed the Russian Federation's armed forces back into the towns of Pivchene and Zalizhne, which is almost a mile or two from where the Russian front line was in the initial invasion in 2022. It's becoming obviously clear that the Russian Federation is not able to win a large amount of the battles that they are fighting right now inside of the region. Not only that, the Russian Federation just yesterday was pushed out of Vilshana by Ukrainian armed forces, meaning that the Russian Federation is also being pushed back in Kupiansk, which has openly been admitted by the Ukrainian armed forces to be an incredibly difficult front line where they may not be able to maintain their defensive barriers and fronts across the Seversky Donets River. It's wildly clear by most statements that the Russian Federation is feigning some form of strength and is attempting to go into these negotiations in bad faith, positioning themselves on the idea that we are winning the war, and unless you are willing to meet our terms, we'll just continue to win the war, and we don't care about going into peace negotiations, because at the end of the day, we only care about winning. We do not care about stopping the fighting or the killing. We just want the war to keep on going until we win. And even still, the Russian Federation isn't doing that well at winning, or even for that matter, defending their airspace, as in the middle of the day, Saratov, an oil refinery, was hit quite significantly by Ukrainian drones, and we were also able to see a pumping facility nearby was also hit. This is the video of the pumping facility being hit, just to clarify that, but here's the clip.
Ебать! Ебать!
Now you see the Ukrainian drone hitting the pumping facility.
Охуеть нахуй! Давайте все разгуливайте!
And causing damage to the machinery that allows for the Russians to be able to pump their oils. Nevertheless, it's still something more to note that it doesn't seem as though anyone in the United States government is actually believing that the Russian Federations are going into this with an act of goodwill. And it appears that the tables are beginning to turn, at least in how the office of the President of the United States has largely been dealing with the situation. To catch you up on everything that was happening in Washington, D.C., at the exact same time everything was happening in the Kremlin in the Russian Federation, we were able to see that the President of the United States did make some statements about the war. We will not be showing the clip here, but I will explain in a brief summary what he stated. He did state that the Russian Federation made a promising statement, but it was not complete. He said he would like to see a ceasefire from the Russian side, and he hopes that Russia will do the right thing. Once again, showing us that the President of the United States is considering the current statements by the Russian Federation to not be completely wholehearted statements behind the concept of pushing forward a peace, or even getting to the idea of negotiating a peace. It once again appears quite clearly to the world that the Russian Federation is only adamant on winning the war, not actually ending the conflict on some form of a compromise where both sides are equally displeased with the outcome, or both sides are equally pleased with the outcome if you're an optimist. Instead, the Russian Federation is looking to win at all costs. And if the peace negotiations are not furthering their ability to win the war, they are not at all interested in getting into them at all. We've also been able to hear that according to additional statements, there's been discussions of land and a large power plant that issues included in the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, which appears that the President of the United States is actually looking for the Russians to give concessions of land and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant back to the state of Ukraine in the current U.S. framework in the negotiations. Considering that the Russian Federation is insisting on the complete opposite, to remind all of y'all again, where they are looking to take control of the entirety of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, which would actually include about 33% of the land that they currently hold inside of Ukraine, or about that value of additional land. It's quite obvious that the Russian Federation and the United States, even at this negotiating level, will never meet eye to eye, or the state of Ukraine for that matter, because the Russian Federation isn't looking to give away land to Ukraine of any value or size to end the war. They're actually looking to have more land given to them in exchange for even talking about ending the war. It is once again quite obvious that they're not going to be moving forward with anything that's going to be amenable. And I have to push that forward time and time again, because this is what we're getting out of today. We are seeing that the war will most likely be going on without a doubt. We have also been able to hear that the president's faith in the Russian Federation seems to be somewhat uncertain, because we have been able to hear an additional statement. This was the most recent one as I started recording, where the president stated, "Now we will see if Russia is in the deal, and if not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world." Once again, letting us know that it appears that the Russian Federation wasn't that adamant on peace, and a lot of the hype talk that the President of the United States was making about the Russians' willingness for peace may have been an attempt to try and bring them to the negotiating table, or an attempt to try and keep the public encouraged to even go through the process or the steps to see that they would never accept any kind of a peace or any kind of a ceasefire even at all. Meanwhile, we've already been able to see that the United States government has made incredibly large measures against the Russian Federation, possibly some of the largest sanctioning measures seen so far. This document right here is a very interesting one. This document is largely one that has today sanctioned all Russian oil exports to the European Union. There will be no gas or oil sales to the European Union as of today, because the Treasury has ended an exemption created by the prior administration that allowed sanctioned Russian banks to process European payments for oil sales. Now, at this very point, because the President of the United States has allowed for this to lapse, no one in Europe can purchase Russian oil. They simply are not going to be allowed to pay the Russian Federation for any of the oil or gas that is currently being shipped into Europe. Meaning, effectively, at this point, the Russians are forced to shut off any oil or gas sales to Europe, and the Europeans, in this sort of a situation right now, are not going to be able to even pay the Russian Federation for the oil and gas that they currently have been able to come into possession of. Meaning, right now, the Russian Federation is now going to be hemorrhaging even more money than they have been over the majority of the war because they are not even able to sell to their largest economic purchasing market, which is the European Union, in any way, shape, or form. But the news has not only been big in the diplomatic world, as we've been able to see that the United States and the Russian Federation are most likely teeing up for another long year in the war in Ukraine. We've been able to see that inside of Berlin, the Volkswagen company is now getting back to remilitarizing, in a sense. We've been able to hear that Volkswagen is considering to start using its factories for production of military vehicles as Germany and Europe have begun rearmament efforts. The automaker has spare capacity as sales of Volkswagen vehicles have dropped a significant amount in recent years, and the Volkswagen company is looking to put those idle factories to good use. And put them to good use by putting them into the remilitarization efforts of Germany and the remainder of Europe. We're not exactly sure at this point what kind of vehicles Volkswagen would be producing. They may be military staff cars, logistical vehicles such as supply trucks, or they may even be armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, or main battle tanks. It's not the first time that Volkswagen has produced weapons of war. There's this time back in the past, but we won't bring that one up. It was a bit of a weird time in Germany's history, but beyond that, they have done this before, and it's not unlikely that they would do it again. Meanwhile, we've been able to hear that the Polish President Andrzej Duda has requested the U.S. to transfer nuclear weapons into Poland, as it appears that escalation in Eastern Europe is still going to be highly likely due to the Russian diplomatic actions that are currently unfolding in front of our eyes right now. And moving on out of Europe as a whole, there's actually been a good amount of news in the rest of the world beyond the diplomatic news that we've not been able to cover yet. For starters, we have been able to hear that the President of the United States has instructed the U.S. Army to draw up options for increasing the American military presence in Panama. And we have been able to hear that U.S. Southern Command is developing plans that vary from partnering more closely with the Panamanian forces to less likely options of a U.S. invasion of Panama and a retaking of the Panama Canal Zone. At this point, we understand that the President of the United States, in a worst-case scenario, is looking for the recapture of the Panama Canal Zone, which is an area that is a red dotted line right through the center of Panama, right over the Panama Canal, and then the area of control extends 5 miles in either direction, which is pretty much this forested canopy on the north and south sides of the canal. The United States of America is looking to regain control of the canal due to claims that the Panamanian government has been compromised by significant Chinese influence, but once again, that is more so of a topic that has been mired in controversy, and of course, we are only here to try and explain what the United States is currently talking about right now. Don't shoot me, I'm just a messenger. But y'all will probably see plenty of comments below shooting us because we brought it up and it's news. But moving on from that and into the rest of the news that we were able to get outside of the Panama Canal, we were able to hear that the Israeli Armed Forces, or the Israeli Air Force, did conduct armed strikes today against Damascus. According to information that we have, they tried to strike against the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group, and the Israeli decision makers, including the defense minister, have vowed to continue such strikes should the transitional government allow these groups to proliferate under its nose, which appears to be highly likely, as the Jelani government, due to their actions in the massacres of just a few days ago, have made it incredibly clear that they are radicalized and extremist factions that are currently in control of most of Syria. And for these reasons, we'll most likely see that the Israelis will continue these strikes and that these sorts of groups will flourish inside of the interim government-controlled areas of Syria. Meanwhile, all the way over in China, we have been able to see something a little bit shocking, and in terms of the invasion of Taiwan, a major development in the People Liberation Army's abilities to be able to conduct amphibious landings and also surge force onto a beachhead that they would be able to create rapidly. We've been able to see that the People's Liberation Army has finally begun to show or really exhibit special barges that have been created to be able to make an amphibious landing on Taiwan a lot easier. Here is one of those barges as seen today. What is interesting about the design of these barges is that they actually have support columns that can be extended out of the bottom of the hull and then pretty much latch into or dig into the sand below, making it almost a pier or a floating pier that they're able to set up whenever they need. Those would make it incredibly easy for the People's Liberation Army, once they are able to conduct an amphibious landing, to start surging armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and main battle tanks onto the mainland of Taiwan once they want to begin their invasion. It's once again showing us that the Chinese have a very strong ambition to conduct a ground invasion of Taiwan, as these kinds of vessels would not be suited to large open ocean voyages or excursions far beyond China's borders. These vessels are specialized with a specific purpose of conducting an amphibious landing on Taiwan. It's the only island in the area that can largely make these vessels suitable, or at least a significant investment. Any island smaller than that, they could largely just use normal landing craft and amphibious support vessels. Once again, these vessels cannot travel that far away from China, and Taiwan is the closest island to China currently. It's wildly clear that these vessels are being made for an impending Chinese invasion of Taiwan, and that the People's Liberation Army continues their gradual efforts in militarizing and specializing their capabilities for an illegal invasion of the island. But beyond that, that is all of the major news that we have today, and it was a lot. But I do thank you so much to everyone who's watched this video so far. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to be able to share this news with all of y'all, and it really is shocking to see how developments are happening in the world. Some viewers last night were incredibly excited, really, by the news, because we were able to get this correct almost all the way back in August about how the U.S.-Russian negotiations would go at this point. We've largely started to lose faith in that idea a little bit over the past few weeks, but it appears that in the wash, it actually turned out to be what appears to be the most accurate assumption of how the conflict was going to go, or at least how an attempt at peace negotiations at this point was going to go. And so for this reason, we actually got this a bit dead on the nail. I'm not going to take a lot of credit for that, because we almost abandoned the concept over the past few weeks, but once again, it looks like it was largely correct. And if you've been around for the channel long enough to hear the original analysis months ago or a year ago at this point, and then see this happening today, it's a little bit wild to think that that's actually how it turned out, especially with the roller coaster that we've been through for the past few weeks. But nevertheless, I thank all of y'all so much once again for watching, and if y'all did enjoy, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We love to have new people here, and we always love to see new faces in the Enforcer channel, and most importantly, in our community of the channel, the Lee Spring Army. And also, if you've made it to this point in the video, please make sure to put down a little LSA in the comments section below. Let us know that you made it to this point in the video by putting LSA down there, because I'd like to know that y'all made it this far. And also, once again, if you really enjoyed the channel, no one has to, but if you want to, you can support us on Patreon. We have to give a massive shout out to our current Patreon supporters, because y'all are continuing to help this channel to be financially possible. It isn't easy or cheap to run a YouTube channel. We have to pay bills like everyone else, and we thank y'all massively for supporting us on Patreon, because y'all help us to be able to pay our bills, keep those lights on, and to be able to keep coming to this each and every day and cover the news for all of y'all, and hopefully the way that y'all like the most. And so with that, a big thanks to all of y'all once again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.